Chapter 21. 1812 hours. April 16th, 2539. Military calendar. Me Trome system. Terminus zone of Tarvos. Task Force Lima Battle Group. UNSC Neferis. Fire! The fleet commander ordered to the task force. Hundreds of Archer missile pods were loosed like an angry flurry of bees from a dormant hive. Deep streaks of propellant tore against the backdrop of Boundary's shadow. Moments earlier, the remaining ships of Captain Fulton's defense force split in half, redlining their power plant's reactors to perform a gravity-assisted slingshot around the moon in a fraction of the time, and gaining an impressive boost in velocity to catch the enemy cruisers off balance. In the distance remained a handful of Covenant ships untouched, lying in wait like dormant sea creatures lying in wait for their next meal to pass by. At once, lances of dazzling white plasma danced across the forward display screen. Explosions pinpricked the black backdrop of space, the merchant vessels failing to reach their targets. At least they bought us some time to maneuver into position, Alistair thought to himself. He should have expected them to be ready for the same trick again, which was why he'd committed the entirety of his force right behind the barrage of unmanned vessels. With any luck, the Covenant would spare his fleet for an additional breath or two, while their plasma cannons cycled for another salvo. Enough time, he hoped, for Arates to finalize targeting solutions for the Macs. Captain, reaching optimal Mac firing range in 14 seconds, Arates reported flatly. A large partition of his computing power was being dedicated to control the remaining unmanned vessels toward their destination while simultaneously coordinating with the other ship's AI. All ships, prepare to fire, Captain Fulton ordered across the fleet. The next phase of the attack was coming to a head. While the Covenant vessels were busy destroying the decoy projectiles, the fleet would advance in a pincer maneuver and deploy their missiles with a gravitational boost. Once they reached optimal firing distance for their magnetic accelerator cannons, the Neferis would take command of the fleet's firing solutions to execute a synchronized shot. Captain Fulton and his bridge crew were fortunate enough, if you could call it that, to have a decade's worth of knowledge in naval doctrine against the Covenant at their disposal. After years of engagements and AI-enhanced battlefield footage from surviving ships, modern ship commanders could derive their engagement tactics through the victories under Admiral Cole and other prominent fleet commanders. Arates, sync firing solutions of our vessels to the Neferis. Fire when ready. The ship's lights flickered and went dim for a second. A massive surge of energy shuddered through the ship as energy funneled to the superconducting coils situated in the dorsal section of the ship's superstructure. Firing! His weapons officer rang out before his voice was drowned out by an eruption of sound so violent it shook the deck below their boots. A massive boom exploded into his eardrums like he had his head in a church bell. Alistair rubbed his eyes for a moment as he worked out the brief wave of nausea from the Mac round. With hazy eyes and bells ringing, he squinted at the weapon's view screen. The screen tracked the projectile through space. The display magnified once again to show in greater detail the faint outline of the Covenant fleet. They were obscured by floating debris and careening balls of fire. The errant human ships began to list toward Boundary's gravity well, heated up, and fizzled into nothingness. Beyond the trails of dozens of ships, however, were hundreds of streaks of propellant lazily drifting into the void of space and disappeared as they gave way to the carnage beyond. Almost simultaneously, each Covenant warship's silvery shimmer gave way to fireballs of destruction as the missiles found their prize. A microsecond later, two of the Covenant ships became completely engulfed in fire as multiple 60-ton ferrotungsten rounds struck their dwindling shields. Captain Fulton exhaled sharply. He had subconsciously been holding his breath as he awaited the damage assessment from Arates. He blinked, took a few deep breaths, but remained cognizant that his bridge crew would be watching him. A litmus test to gauge how they should react. With an even tone, he queried the avatar to his flank. Arates. Effect on target? No sooner had he finished his question than he saw the warrior grip his spear tighter and lick his lips. Theatrics. But it got the point across. Alistair looked back at the forward display screen, already dreading the answer. One Mac from the Neferis struck the lead vessel. The Hydaspes' round was off course and missed completely. The Pelium struck another target, and the Dunkirk failed to fire. Initial reports from their AI state a cascading failure in engineering. The slingshot maneuver around Tarvos was too much for it to handle. They're now running at 34% efficiency. They're still in the fight, but won't be able to fire any remaining Mac rounds until a complete refit and shakedown of their engines is complete. Not quite a paperweight, The Dunkirk still had its uses, but without the full capability of a heavy destroyer at his disposal, the captain of Task Force Lima was now at an even dire disadvantage. All told, we managed to drop the shields on the lead vessel and inflict nominal damage to its hull, but it's still in the fight. And the others? The remaining cruiser's shields are still intact. They're holding position above the equator. A murmur rumbled among the crew now. Some panicked, and others determined to finish the fight. Over the last several years of his command, Alistair had the privilege of hand-selecting junior officers to fill his ranks. He hoped that their talents would be enough to see their collective survival through another engagement. At this moment, he would put his assumptions to the test as he demanded they journey into hell once again. The explosion to Arthur's left reverberated down the passageway beyond and dissipated into the hangar they arrived in. He rounded the corner with Cal 141, rifle raised, and expected the worst. Teal 3, status, he demanded again. Moments earlier, he had ordered Sheila down the hall to investigate the route ahead while he consolidated the rest of Teal Force. A secondary explosion rang out. Crackles of static discourage ionized the air around a corner, and the ragdoll form of a hulking cobalt blue figure somersaulted through the air. Sheila, Cal shouted over team comm and dashed toward the limp body. Teal 3 had been propelled by the blast several meters and slid to a halt beyond Arthur's view. Now scrambling to adapt to the developing situation, Arthur motioned for a fire team of ODSTs to assist Cal and the other to follow him. Arthur rounded the corner to see a squad of ambitious-looking elite warriors lying in wait behind a makeshift barricade, and immediately fired upon the petty officer. He ducked back into cover and cursed. Entrenched elites, plasma rifles, and grenades. He surveyed the group of Marines approaching, identified the rocket jockey among them, and his onboard computer displayed a name on his HUD. Private Asota, on my command fire, your jackhammer 2 meters off the deck. With that command, the rest of the Marines knew what to do and took up covered positions along the stretch of the hallway, dodging plasma fire along the way. Arthur glanced at the private, raised a flat palm vertically, and gave the hand signal asking, "Are you ready?" The private returned the challenge and adjusted the dual-tubed 102mm rocket launcher on his shoulder. The Spartan stepped back from the wall of the hallway, brought his MA-5B to bear, and shouted, "Covering fire!" The suppression team loosed a flurry of automatic gunfire in an attempt to suppress the elites long enough for Private Asota to get in position and fire the 2-rocket payload toward the elites lying in wait. 2 angry, billowing streaks of smoke and fire filled the alien passageway, punctuated by electric blue streaks of plasma fire, striking one Marine in the chest. "Advance," Arthur ordered. Speed and aggression were going to win this gunfight, which meant they unfortunately had to leave the suffering Marine to tend to his own wounds, if he was still alive. The fire team broke through the black smoke to find 6 elite warriors splayed on the ground beyond the destroyed assemblage of machinery and storage containers. One attempted to reach for his plasma pistol attached to his leg, and Arthur unceremoniously put 2 7.62mm armor-piercing rounds into its head. "Secure the area. I'm going back to check on Teal 3, he barked, and sped off in the direction they came. Moments later, he came skidding to a halt and cringed as tendrils of smoke rose from the chest plate of Sheila's Mjolnir armor. A ragged hole was blown out on her side, exposing the bubbling, steaming combination of hydrostatic gel and deep red arterial blood. "I've got the bleeding to stop. I ran a diagnostic on her armor. Looks like she took a direct hit from a plasma grenade from that ambush back there. She has a lacerated kidney, 2 broken ribs, and 3rd-degree burns around the impact area. Got off lucky, didn't you, Sheila?" Arthur did the math in his head, hearing the even keel of Cal's voice. She was eerily calm under pressure, even in the direst of circumstances. But this was Sheila they were talking about. They've all had injuries before, some even worse than what Cal just described. But as he surveyed the carnage around Sheila's motionless body, he wasn't so sure she'd be able to continue the mission. A ragged cough emanated from Sheila's helmet, and her arms slowly began to rise from her sides. She gingerly removed her helmet to show a youthful-looking woman in her late 20s with jet black hair and a dark complexion. Subtle scars tattooed her face from their augmentations during training back on Reach. Blood splatter painted the inside of the Spartan's helmet and the side of her cheek as she began to open her mouth. The security specialist winced in pain as she gained consciousness, becoming aware of her injuries. The biofoam auto-injector's polypseudomorphine could only do so much for a soldier. "Ow," was all she could mutter before succumbing to a violent coughing fit, specks of dried blood sputtering onto the deck. "What's her status, Cal?" Arthur said grimly. I've seen worse. The tech suit is holding everything together pretty well. And there's enough biofoam to seal the wound and keep it sealed even with movement. Give her a few minutes for the shock to wear off, then we can be on our way, she said calmly. As she spoke, Cal propped Sheila up on a control panel situated in the middle of the hallway and handed the carbon-scorched helmet back to the injured Spartan. She accepted and situated it back on her head, twisted slightly, and Arthur could hear a faint hiss as the pressure seal engaged. Sheila began rummaging through a hard case on her thigh and produced a small black bag. She unzipped the container and pulled an auto-injector from its container, inserted the needle into a port in her armor, and flexed her extremities. It was a wake-up stim, a cocktail of combat stimulants and adrenaline that she took. Satisfied that she had no other injuries, she stood up and tested her mobility. It's going to take a lot more than a grenade to slow me down, Teal Leader, Sheila said, and grabbed another weapon from the magnetic mount on her back. Let's get out of here. The clock's ticking. Those Marines and militiamen on the ground can't wait forever. All right, then, the team leader said and began the jog back to the awaiting ODST's position near the ambush site. The trio of Spartans arrived to see the troops situated in concealed positions, staggered throughout the numerous branching hallways and ductwork of the ship's interior. Sir, one Marine chimed in, evidently their team leader. No movement besides a curious grunt or two. We took care of him. Ready to proceed. The mission remained unchanged. Find a suitable spot to stash the nuke, head back to the Hornets, get clear, and watch the fireworks. The remaining troops under his command set off down yet another maze of meandering passageways and corridors, and mopped up the light resistance beyond. Seems too easy, doesn't it? One Marine chimed in as they continued to clear hallway after hallway. Yeah, it does, Arthur said. Keep your head on a swivel. We don't know what the Hingeheads have in store for us. All Usei Taham had to do was follow the bodies. His cadre of security officers touched down several units ago, dispatched the pitiful gaggle of humans charged with protecting their archaic fighter craft, and got to work hunting down the Demon 3 before they inflicted untold damage to his former ship. They continued their path through the gore-laden halls of the Purity of Spirit, stepping over felled Covenant troops. Many of them were still clutching tools or data pads, caught off guard by the sudden and violent raid on the ship. Blade Master, one security officer said, breaking the silence to provide an update on the humans' movements. The bridge crew demands an update. The humans continue to make their way toward the engineering deck of the ship, and they don't have enough warriors to stop them. Uze clacked his mandibles in disgust at the cowards running this ship. Instead of taking the initiative and hunting down the humans, they chose to barricade themselves behind the sturdy doors of this magnificent ship of war. Yet another failure of the disgraced former shipmaster Siswai Udumi. Fleetmaster Vadami was right to cut him down. Usei knew the dead Sanghili was power-hungry and ruthless, but he failed to realize just how derelict he had become in his duties before attempting to wrest command of the fleet from Vadami. A ship's bridge crew was a direct reflection of the leadership and wisdom of its shipmaster. And if the whelps locked in the bridge were any indication of Udumi's leadership, then this ship was already lost. It would be up to him to take control of the situation and root out the infidels that were actively defiling his ship. Taham activated the communication device embedded in the helmet of his combat harness and hailed the bridge crew of the Purity. This is Blade Master Uze Taham. We are coming to the bridge. Activate gravity. Lift A-12 on port side hangar 3. You will relinquish control of this ship to my team, and we will rid this vessel of these vermin. A pause over the channel told Usei everything he needed to know. B. Blade Master, I do not understand, came one bridge officer. The bridge is secured, and we maintain control of the ship? He clenched his jaws, fighting the urge to dress down the Sanghili officer over the radio. He resisted the temptation, however, understanding the weight of what he just heard. If the officer was still loyal to Udumi's legacy, or had the foresight of what Usei was about to do, he could dispatch his team in half a dozen ways. So he chose his next words very carefully. Activate the gravity lift in the hangar, bridge officer. Our pursuit of the demons is proving to be a fruitless waste of time. If I can observe their movements from our command center, I can dispatch my hunter-killer teams throughout the decks in a more efficient manner. He waited for several moments before a response was given over the communications device. The elites on the bridge undoubtedly discussing their options, weighing the truth of what Uze Taham just requested. My apologies, Blade Master Taham, of course. I defer to your wisdom on how to eradicate the demons. Please proceed to lift A-12 in the center of the hangar. Radio to me when you are approaching the bridge so we can disengage security on the blast doors. So either their stupidity and cowardice knew no bounds, or it was a trap. No matter, he thought, stepping onto the raised platform situated across the massive hangar. Motes of light began to emanate from the ceiling. Streaks of almost imperceptible purple light filled his vision, and the team began to float toward the iris opening above them. Several units and redirections later, the security chief and his cohort made their way to the command deck, comfortably nested deep within the recesses of the massive battlecruiser. Unlike the illogical layout of human vessels, the Covenant chose a more practical approach, opting to situate their most critical function of war in a latticed cage of hardened metallic beams, impervious to all but the most impressive weaponry the humans could throw at them. Tom knew that even if he had to, he could not force his way in. Thus, the ruse was required to gain entry into the bridge and relieve the cowards of their station. He hailed the bridge crew a final time. "We see you on the security cameras, Blademaster. Please approach." And with that, the two halves comprising the blast door splayed apart to reveal a handful of elites wielding plasma rifles trained on Usei himself. They motioned with their weapons for the Sangheli strike team to enter and lay down their weapons. "What is this heresy?" one of Taham's elites proclaimed, raising his own weapon, and was cut down by a flurry of plasma bolts to the chest. His smoking corpse crumpled to the ground in a smoldering heap, his combat harness glowing a dull red from the immense heat. "This is no heresy, brothers," one elite said, and sauntered down the shipmaster's ramp from the dominating command console elevated in the interior of the chamber. Shipmaster Udumi was right. Fleetmaster Vadami is too young, too inexperienced to lead the fleet of particular justice. His reckless actions would see us dead at the hands of the infidels. Udumi should have been the rightful leader of our fleet. To glory, the bridge crew behind and to his flanks erupted in a war cry for their fallen leader. "Then it is unfortunate that Fleetmaster Vadami had the wisdom to appoint me as his chief security officer not 2 cycles ago, young warrior." The Blade Master addressed the de facto leader of the ship's crew and scowled. "And why is that?" He barked incredulously. "Even for a warrior as renowned as you, Blade Master Taham, you are no match for us." "That may be so. What is your name, brother?" Taham said calmly. "Intelligence Officer Jeddah Tidham," he said and laughed haughtily. "What does it matter?" "It matters," Usei trailed, "because I want to know whose battle poem and keep to raise to the ground next time I visit Sanghelios," he finished, referring to their species' home world. At this, the intelligence officers snorted in amusement that their captors would somehow kill his entire cadre of officers, armed. He pointed their weapons at them. For an intelligence officer, he smiled to himself. He was not very bright. He had played his hand as Taham requested access to the bridge. "Tell me, what did your security cameras tell you when we boarded the Purity?" "Jeddah Tidham, if this is your idea of negotiating, it is a very poor display, Blade Master." The usurper responded. "But I'll play your game. Nonetheless." He glanced to another officer beside him and clacked a mandible, signaling him to speak. "We observed your team land in Banshees on the same landing pad as the human security team. Dispatch them, and continue your mission in pursuit of the demons," the elite said. "And have we taken any casualties thus far?" Taham said. No, Blade Master," he said, clearly confused at the point he was getting at. The elite being questioned surveyed their captors, and the realization hit home like a plasma bolt to the chest. His eyes widened and mandibles splayed as he attempted to shout something to the intelligence officer. "Wait, there's 2 miss," was all the officer could exclaim before a hail of plasma appeared from nowhere and cut down the handful of bridge crew before them. A final look of shock was paralyzed into Tedham's face as he took several plasma rifle rounds to the chest, landing in a smoldering heap on the deck of the Purity of Spirit. The 2 cloaked elites were disabling their devices to appear at Usei's flanks. "A pity," one elite said and spat onto their mangled corpses. "It is indeed, brother. Now," he picked up his own plasma rifle from the deck beneath him, "let us rid this vessel of the demons and their sins." Taham stepped over the remains of the intelligence offer and moved toward the captain's helm. As he settled into the command chair, a series of holographic glyphs and other alien reports scrolled across the display nearest him. He engaged the struggling power plant below his hooves, disengaged the safety protocols, and began to steer the Purity of Spirit back into space. "What shall you do about the demons, Blade Master?" one security officer said as he settled in behind a weapons station farther beyond. He had devised just that on the flight between the 2 vessels. While he took the Purity back into orbit, effectively trapping them on board with their despicable hell bombs, he would take a well-suited team of warriors to interdict them before they could make it to the engineering deck. If all else failed, he had a contingency for this as well. "We will force their hand and trap them here with us. If we allow them to escape, They will destroy the purity with one of their hell bombs. He extended a finger onto a stripe of light near his hand. Taham increased the speed to escape velocity. The deck shuddered in protest as the massive ship of war overcame its inertia and broke through the wispy clouds above. The gravitational dampeners came online, and the slight tug of acceleration was cushioned to almost nothing. Once they're located, we will destroy them ourselves. If we fail, detach the section of the ship and jettison them to space. The questioning Sangheili lowered his mandibles toward the decking below, now understanding Taham's intent. Often, there was wisdom in simplicity. Continue to scour the ship, brothers. We will find this scourge and expel their desecrations from this ship, Taham said, and motioned for a subordinate to take the helm. Brother, I am entrusting the helm to you now. Do not fail. I shall return. Usei roared a rallying cry, and his security detail gathered around him with weapons at port arms. To the hunt. He looked at the elite now settling uncomfortably in the shipmaster's station. Brother, we will report back after our victory. With that final order, the group exited the bridge.